Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Sunday School Dropouts Podcast. We are so glad that you're all with us today.
Yes, I am excited. And Andrew, I'm going to have you introduce our guest in just a moment. But before we do that, I just want to let everybody know that the Center for Trauma Resolution and Recovery has spring support groups that are now open for registration. So if you have been wanting to join a support group, feel connected to other people who have been going through similar processes as you have in terms of faith deconstruction, healing from religious trauma, or adverse religious experiences, support groups are really, really wonderful ways to be able to do that and to not feel so alone or so isolated. So you can head to our show notes and find a link there to get more information. You can go to our website, traumaresolutionandrecovery.com. Under the services tab, there is one that says support groups. You can click on that and all the information will be there. And of course, you can also go to our social media, which is at Trauma Resolution and Recovery on Instagram, and you can find all of the information for all of our support groups there.
Hope to see a lot of folks sign up for those. I think
Yeah.
always a great resource. So today, definitely excited about our guest today. We are interviewing Ashley Dunston. And for those who, some of you may be familiar with her presence on Instagram, and those who aren't, what we're going to be talking about is some of her own personal story around purity culture, fat phobia, body shaming, diet culture, and just kind of the intersection of all of those things and how also that shows up and kind of is enabled and perpetuated in evangelical culture. She's sharing a lot of her own story, and I really appreciate her being willing to do that and coming on the show.
Yeah, this is a really great conversation. And I think something that's maybe not talked about publicly a lot in terms of these intersections of purity culture and fat phobia, body shaming, body image, things like that. And yet so many people that I talk to, whether it's in my personal life or professional life, are seeing the intersection of all of these and recognizing how all of it impacts you even years or decades after leaving purity culture. So this is an area I've done a lot of research on. So I was particularly excited for this conversation today. And I'm so glad that Ashley was willing to join us to talk about something that can be very tender, but very, very important. So I'm excited for everybody to listen. But before we get into it, we have a couple, listener stories and questions. And I'm going to just offer the disclaimer that we do at the beginning of every episode, that we recognize that some of the topics and discussions that we have in any episode might bring up feelings, emotions, and triggers that may require more processing or be too much to handle right now. So please always feel free to skip any episode or parts of episodes and come back if and when you are ready. Our goal is to help you trust your own body and lived experience so you can take what you need and leave what you don't.
And now, one of our listener stories. They say, our high school had purity sex ed talks with genders separated, and only the girls had to sign purity pacts with themselves. I was, of course, pure, but I can't imagine how that landed for those who weren't. Ugh.
Oh, yeah. I know we talked about this in another episode, but I think what's important for people to recognize is that in the early 90s, when President Clinton was in office, there was the Welfare Act that was signed, and deeply hidden into that legislation was information about they passed this legislation stating that schools, public schools in the entire country would receive funding for their sex ed programs so long as they were using this abstinence-only curriculum, which meant that even if you weren't growing up in purity culture through a religious lens, you were still receiving that message, even if you were at a public school. So when they're talking about, sex ed being separated, talking about purity, I'm like, oh yeah, that is something I definitely remember being a part of. And yeah, that's why I think purity culture is so pervasive, even if you didn't grow up religious, because it was actually in our school systems being taught as the right way to behave and manage yourself.
Yeah. Wow. I of course went to a private Christian school, so there's that. We definitely had stuff similar to this, but I don't recall that there was a pact that was signed. It was more like marriage and the family. It was literally an entire semester of some Bible class we had to take, and that was our sex ed. It didn't happen until senior year, though. Anyway, all of that to say, no, I do sarcastically love the double standard here. Of course, the girls had to sign something. The boys, right, I'm assuming, didn't. They were just told to, I don't know, not masturbate or something. Probably. I don't know.
For us girls, it was our job or responsibility to make sure you boys were pure. So it makes sense that we sign a pact to do so.
I mean, someone's got to do it, and it's clearly not the boys themselves.
Yeah.
So.
Yes, you have no control over yourself. So I'm glad that we could really take one for the team on that. So. All right, so we have a couple of listener questions, and the first one is, I'm feeling like I'm constantly policing my appearance and behavior, even when no one is watching. How do I unlearn that internalized gaze?
Yeah, I'm just letting that one sink in. I get that. I think it's easy for a lot of us who grew up in high control systems, whether that was religion, family system, or all of the above, as is often the case. Yeah, it's easy to kind of have almost like this hypervigilance that even when no one's watching, you find yourself still doing it. The therapist in me, of course, is having all these follow-up questions because depending upon how intrusive and how prevalent this is, that would depend a little bit on what I say in that. But I think, I do think therapy or coaching is a great place to start. But I do think, and recognizing that, first of all, just normalizing it. And what I mean by that is it's understandable that there's a part of you that's doing that. If you grew up in a system that it was important how you appeared, how you behaved, how you presented, like that determined how you were accepted and loved and shown up for by the community around you, it makes sense that there's going to be a part of you, and your nervous system is literally going to be wired to be hypervigilant to those things, even if there's not another person around you. And certainly I think there's more work to do that can be done beyond that, but I just want to start with the basics. And first of all, I just want to, normalize that. Like that makes a lot of sense, that you would have a part showing up that way.
Yeah, it does. I'm thinking back to kind of something that I used to play around with a little bit. It kind of falls under this umbrella of like titration. That's a concept we talk about in somatic experiencing a lot, where it's like you kind of do things in these little tiny increments in order to allow your nervous system to have time to readjust and to stabilize and find safety. And so titration is meaning like we're not going to like dive into it. So for instance, if you are policing your own appearance and you have all these modesty rules, what we're not going to do is like have you go walk down the street in a bikini or something like that. That would be like deeply destabilizing and really kind of mess with that internal physiology, probably put you into a trauma response and all of that, right? So we would look for like, what are ways then that we can start to kind of play around with a little bit of discomfort, but not to the point where it feels intolerable. So for me, I really liked wearing V-neck shirts, but of course I wasn't supposed to because of all the implications of the skin that it could show, or a V that actually is like pointing down towards my breast, or, things like that. And so I bought some V-neck shirts, and that was the first little bit of like actually letting myself buy them. And I took them home, but I didn't wear them for a while. And then I would put a V-neck shirt on and just wear it at home and notice, how did that feel? What was it like to actually be wearing that shirt, letting the discomfort, rise and fall and those sorts of things, even just wearing the shirt by myself. Then maybe I would put the shirt on and I'd run to Starbucks or the grocery store or something and just notice what it was like. Maybe I even had a coat on over it. Who knows? But like these little tiny ways where I would kind of give myself opportunities to wear something, in this case, that was not permitted beforehand, but was now, and I was wanting to get used to it. And so slowly over time, it's like my body built up some capacity to wear a V-neck shirt and not feel like everybody was staring on me or not feel totally uncomfortable in my body. And it was, this gradual process of letting myself get used to it, but doing it in very small doses so that my physiology did not become overwhelmed. And again, that it was uncomfortable sometimes, but it wasn't intolerable, right? So I could wear that shirt, and if it felt like it was too much, it's like, okay, I'm going to just, go back to wearing it around the house until I feel comfortable to try a little field trip again, right? So that's just something that I tried, whether it was with behavior or clothing or music I listened to or whatever, just like small ways to kind of give my system time and space to acclimate before I added something onto it. And that was really helpful for me.
Yeah, I agree. I think, titration from somatic experiencing, I think, is a great way to approach a lot of these things. We have another question here. How do I grieve the loss of the spiritual identity I once had, even though I now see how harmful it was?
I really appreciate this question because I think it's probably more common than people might let on. I think there can be a lot of shame and guilt and confusion that comes up when you're grieving something that was harmful. You know, why do I miss it? Why do I wish I still had contact with these people or whatnot? And I think part of what we can do is give ourselves some compassion of like, grief doesn't necessarily have to make cognitive sense, right? Like, this was your identity. Your spirituality was their identity. Everything about your life probably was defined by it. Your relationships, your career choices, the things that you wore, the places that you went to, how you spent your time, right? Everything was wrapped up in it. So to lose that is a huge loss. Even if on the surface you're like, yeah, no, that's okay. I don't want to do that. But that's a huge loss. It means you're having to redefine every aspect of who you are. And that's not only hard work, but you feel the pain, the sadness of losing that because you're kind of starting over. And so my invitation is simply to be compassionate with yourself and to be patient with yourself, and also to say like that grief is normal and it doesn't have to make cognitive sense. You might cognitively know, I don't want to be back in that system or that religion or in that relationship. That is fine. And it's okay to feel sad or feel lost or feel that grief over it. What do you think, Andrew?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I agree with all of that. I think sometimes too, it's okay, or it can be helpful to kind of like take inventory of what were the things that you did appreciate about it. Like there's probably a lot of things that were harmful. There's probably also things that were okay. And what I mean by that is like what was like at the core of it all, what was the value? Like, for example, for a lot of folks, it's community. Like you had belonging there, even if, we recognize there were some harmful dynamics and high control dynamics and all of those things. Like the two things can be true at once. Like there was a lot of harm, things that weren't serving you. It was the right thing to leave, and also valuing, wanting, and then missing community is a pretty normal human reaction. I mean, we're social creatures. We need that. And so that's just one example. So things like that, I think it's okay to also to kind of take inventory of what it is we lost, because all the stuff we lost, it wasn't all inherently bad. There were things that probably did serve us at some point in our lives.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Great question. So we have another listener story. It's a short one this time, but they said, I developed vaginismus and literally had to get part of my hymen removed because I couldn't have sex. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. I know that that's not easy to share. That can feel like a lot of different things, confusing. The amount of people I know that have experienced some sort of sexual dysfunction, whether it is, ED or vaginismus or painful intercourse or just immense guilt and shame after, engaging in sexual activity because of purity culture, because of high control religion, is so high. I mean, almost everybody I know has dealt with something where things aren't working as they should be because of purity culture. And it's sad to me. And it also reaffirms to me how abusive purity culture is, because if these are the impacts that people are dealing with, then it had to be pretty bad, and so I think it validates what we are all coming to understand anecdotally. And I'm just really sorry that this person had to have a surgery in order to deal with the impacts of purity culture.
Yeah, exactly. Same. And I just second what you already said. I do just appreciate and don't take it lightly them sharing that with us. So thank you. Ashley Dunston is a writer and former evangelical whose work explores the intersections of purity culture and diet culture, two powerful forces that shaped her upbringing and, as she highlights, share striking similarities. Ashley holds a bachelor's degree in English from Vanguard University of Southern California and draws on her lived experience to shed light on the ways these cultural systems impact identity, body image, and self-worth. Through her writing and storytelling, Ashley invites others to question and heal from the messages they've inherited.
Welcome, Ashley, to the Sunday School Dropouts podcast. It is so wonderful to have you here today.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's going to be a great conversation. I was so excited when Andrew mentioned that you might be interested in being a part of this kind of purity culture and all the other things that go along with it season. And so for people who have not heard your story, which includes me, I wonder if we can just start off by sharing a little bit about the environment that you grew up in, whether that's religiously or culturally at home, and especially around like how body image was talked about and some of the rules around that, wherever you want to go with it.
Yeah. So I grew up in Colorado Springs, which is a very
Yeah.
Christian, very conservative corner of Colorado Springs.
Sure.
And it was like, during the 90s and 2000s is when I was like coming of age. And that was when, a lot of the youth group megachurch stuff was really big and everything. So, all of that in Colorado Springs was huge. I am the oldest of 5 kids, a big family, very privileged upbringing, lived in a nice area of Colorado Springs. My dad made a lot of money. We were, like the typical all-American family in a lot of ways. And then I got really involved with youth group starting in middle school. So that's where I was all about it. I took my faith really seriously. I was a really good kid, the one that everyone asked to babysit their kids and never got into trouble or anything like that. So I was really the good kid, did the right thing. And yeah, Colorado Springs is interesting because it's very conservative and Christian, but it's not exempt from being very worldly too. So it's a lot of image driven people trying to, like have the perfect looking family and stuff. And around the time I was, going through puberty, becoming a teenager, that's where I started to gain a lot of weight. And that became kind of like a focal point for just, the rest of my teen years growing up. My parents were very, averse to that because it messed with the image of their like perfect family. So that sort of started this long journey, I guess, of, my parents trying to get me to lose weight. And that was sort of the culture of my home. And then church was kind of my escape from all of that because I felt like I had good friends at church. I had kind of a place where I felt like I was treated better than at home or at school. And so church was kind of that place where I felt like I fit in. So yeah, that was sort of what my life was like growing up and coming of age was just this, very image driven, but also it was like, oh, but we're Christians too. And it was very confusing, to say the least.
Yeah.
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 What were some of the earliest messages that you did receive about your body, about like desirability, morality, worth, things like that?
I mean, probably from a young age, the idea was that, you are supposed to grow up and get married and have kids and start a family, and that's the best thing you can do. And so in order to achieve that, you need to make yourself like a very desirable person. And so the messaging around bodies was, you need to look good, you need to be attractive, you need to be healthy. And that's a big thing that comes up in Colorado too, because everybody does outdoorsy activities. Everybody is, running or skiing or doing all kinds of, workout kind of stuff. I did all of that. I did all of that when I was overweight too. I could snowboard, wakeboard, go hiking, all of those things. But I think the messaging was that you need to fit the image of this perfect family. So that was, kind of the messages I was getting pretty early on, actually.
Yeah.
My mom was kind of the trophy wife looking mom. And so, everyone thought she was my big sister. She was very attractive, blonde, slim, like all of that. So it was like that was the ideal kind of, what you wanted to look like. And then you have this, perfect family and these good looking kids. And so I was like the one part of my parents' life that wasn't quite fitting that cookie cutter. So yeah.
That's really interesting. Yeah, because I mean, I feel like we grew up at similar times where, purity culture is so present and who you are supposed to be, how you're supposed to look is like the forefront of like what a good Christian girl is supposed to be. So I heard you say a little bit that there were some messages that you were kind of explicitly taught about your body and what that meant. So I'm just curious to know what some of those messages were, as well as like how did that kind of tie into purity culture in terms of just like who you were supposed to be ultimately, if that makes sense.
Yeah. When I think about the messages I was getting, I mostly think about my dad because he was the one who was always lecturing me, always talking to me about my body image. I mean, both my parents did, but I would say my dad was like specifically really obsessed with that. And so some of the messages Like, he would literally quote the Bible and say, like, your body is a temple. And so, like, basically insinuating that to be overweight is to not be honoring your body the way that God wants you to. And so, because I took my faith so seriously, that was something that to me, I felt really guilty about, because I was like, I'm not honoring my body the way that God wants me to. And so, those were the messages there. There was a lot of diet culture and messaging. So the idea that you need to put good things into your body, and that basically it was almost like a purity of what you eat or what you consume, that if you put bad things in your body, then that makes you bad. Or it was like a morality. So I had a lot of messaging around food and what I was allowed or not allowed to eat as far as amount or content or anything. So it felt like a purity culture in the sense of like keeping your literal body pure of any toxins, fats or sugars or anything. And I mean, I think one of the things that I would say is that even though there was a lot of purity culture messaging in church as far as dress modestly, don't have sex, whatever, a lot of that kind of missed me because I wasn't the demographic of teenage girl that they were aiming that toward. The girls that they were worried about were the girls that were conventionally attractive and skinny, and like it was sort of like, oh, you don't have to worry about this because the underlying message is that guys don't want to date you anyway, so it doesn't really matter. I mean, I was dressing modestly, I was staying away from boys and everything, but the messaging there was just like, well, this is not for you. This is for you to take once you're thin, then we can talk about, sexual temptation and all of that. So
yeah. It's interesting because I did a kind of like a research study a couple summers ago, and it was really looking at the intersection of purity culture, body image, diet culture, religious fundamentalism. And I kind of went into the study kind of like not having a lot of conclusions made, just in terms of like, I know these connect and I want to hear from other people how these things connect. And I think the messages, or what you were just saying, seem to be so prevalent in so many of the people that I have spoken with, just in terms of whether that's like purity of food, body as a temple. You have to watch what you're putting into your body so that you stay a certain size, so then you'll be attractive to this man who's supposed to be your husband. You also have to stay that size or stay that attractive. And there is such a crossover, I feel like, between diet culture and purity culture that is like baked in for women in particular, I think, in ways that are sometimes even difficult to articulate, because it is almost like the exact same thing. It's like diet culture, purity culture, like two sides of the same coin. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I even went to Weight Watchers meetings as a teenager, and they were held in churches. So that's like the craziest thing too. Like the meetings take place in a church, which just, I don't know. I just think that really drives home a lot of those ideas that a lot of Christian women are trying to lose weight or trying to stay and maintain a weight so that they fulfill who they're supposed to be.
Yeah, I'm curious too, especially on the note of like purity and around food and intake and just health and wellness culture, because you did mention like that being some of the motivation for what what your parents were saying. But I am curious, was that standard also pushed with your siblings?
Not at all. No, and I always bring this up, but like my two younger sisters are very conventionally attractive. They never had issues with gaining weight or anything. And my middle sister specifically was like a super picky eater, to the point where she would only eat junk food. Like that was just kind of her thing from, childhood on. And my parents were not concerned about, her putting junk into her body because it didn't show up, like it didn't reflect. So no, I mean, there wasn't the same standard. My brothers, same thing, like they didn't have any issues with that. And the biggest thing was that like boys, it seems like when they go through puberty, they hit a growth spurt and then they get really tall. And like that's what happened to both my brothers. They got very tall, and it was just never an issue. So no. And in fact, my siblings were they were taught the same thing, but sort of in a way where my parents expected my siblings to like look out for me or report back to them if I was, eating something I shouldn't have or whatever. So my siblings had the same idea of like, oh, this is a bad thing that you're doing and we need to tell on you or we need to whatever, And so, no, that was not pushed at all because it didn't matter. That's the thing. It was never really about health. It was just about the image because I never had, I never had any health issues related to weight. I never was pre-diabetic. I never had any issues or anything like that. But it was because I looked a certain way. Right. They just assumed there was potentially going to be a health issue. But yeah.
Yeah, and that's what I thought, but I wanted to clarify that. And so, I mean, on that note, I know that you shared that you were pressured into gastric bypass surgery when you were still a teenager, and I'm just curious if you'd be willing to speak to some of that.
Yeah.
Both in terms of like the role your family played, but also like faith. And how that played into it.
Yeah. No, this is wild. And I can it's been so long I can kind of get off about it because it's like the intersections of Christianity and stuff are so crazy. So, and I've told Andrew this story before, but it always makes me laugh. So Colorado Springs, if you're familiar with the Left Behind series, the book series.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So the authors of Left Behind, Jerry Jenkins and Tim LaHaye, they are from Colorado Springs. That's where they live. I think they still do. I don't know. Anyway, another lesser known thing about Jerry Jenkins is that he likes to gamble. He's like notorious for liking to play poker and stuff like that. Well, because my dad was like a, well-known, powerful businessman in Colorado Springs, he ended up several times going to these poker games that Jerry Jenkins was at. And of course, I thought that was so cool because I was a teenager who read all the Left Behind books and I had read the teen Left Behind books. So I thought that was kind of cool. And then I remember my dad talking to me about how, over time they had noticed that Jerry Jenkins was getting really thin and he was a very big guy and then he was like really slimming down. And they had asked him at the poker games, oh, what have you been up to? Like, what have you been doing? Because my dad was obsessed with every kind of weight loss trend to try to get me on it, Well, it turns out that Jerry Jenkins had gastric bypass surgery. And so he had told my dad about it. And that sent my dad down kind of a rabbit hole of researching this. And so I remember I got back from like a church retreat. I was 19 at the time. So I was, I was an adult, but I was like a young adult still living at home, going to community college. And I had been planning on transferring to Vanguard University. It's a Christian college in Southern California. So I was going to transfer there the following fall of 2009. And I got back from this retreat and my dad was like, oh, I wanted to talk to you about something. And he had pulled up his laptop and he had showed me some videos he'd found on YouTube and stuff about this particular type of gastric bypass surgery. And, showed me this whole video from the Discovery Channel about it. And it was this whole thing, one of his many lectures. And at that point I had pretty much, I was so over having these conversations with my dad, tired of it, And one thing that he had said, he was like, so, I really think God wants you to go to California, go to school out there. And I think that's his plan for you. But, and I think that you're going to find your future husband out there, when you go to college. I really think that'll happen. But he said, but I think that as you are now, he's going to overlook you. And so he was like, and he said something else about how, everybody in California is good looking and they go to the beach and he's like, I want you to fit in. And so he sort of presented me with this ultimatum of we can get this surgery and then, pay for you to go to a Christian college in California and have this great time, this great life out there. And so, I had a lot of reservations, but eventually I acquiesced to it. We went out and visited the doctor. The doctor was in Las Vegas, his particular doctor, because also backing up, as far as my body mass index and everything, I did not qualify for like a traditional gastric bypass surgery, as in like insurance wouldn't cover it or anything like that, you know? So we were able to find, my dad found this doctor in Las Vegas who had a little bit different type of surgery, and he didn't have such a strict, I guess, like guideline of what you had to be. Like he had, you know, done surgeries on people even if they weren't super overweight or something. So anyway, we were able to go visit that doctor. He answered a lot of questions, and it did, like, I mean, I will say, like, at the time it felt like I felt okay about it. And I still, at the end of the day, I still agreed to it. But this is after, you know, years and years of constantly hearing messages of like, once you lose weight, everything in your life will be so much better, you know? So yeah, I got the surgery in April of 2009 and then transferred to Vanguard in August of 2009. So my first couple semesters there was when I was like losing the most amount of weight. So I was at college, living on my own in California. And yeah, I mean, honestly, having a good time, but it was so crazy because I was losing weight so fast. And like, you know, I mean, that comes with, a lot of, it's crazy. Like your mind doesn't keep up with your body. And so very mentally and physically draining to be losing weight that fast. And then by the time I got to like the 1 year mark, I had lost about 100 pounds. So it was like within 1 year. So it was a lot.
That's significant.
And, so it was a pretty crazy transition. And I mean, after that, it was like, and I would come back home for the summer or for holidays and stuff. And like, you know, people would be like, you look like a totally different person. And so it was just constantly hearing those comments, you know, over and over. And that became, once again, my weight became the focal point this time because I was so skinny and not because, you know, so it was crazy. But that's kind of what happened.
Well, I'm curious, and I know I didn't prep you for this, but like throughout all of these years, as you are the quote unquote, you know, like odd person out in your family, right, in terms of body size, and like, what was that doing to you, like psychologically speaking or shame wise? Because I can imagine like that's an immense amount of pressure, feeling terrible about yourself because of this added pressure of family, like really pushing these messages and being the ones to reinforce, you know, insecurities or, you know, whatever. I just, where were you at, you know, psychologically during all of those years?
Yeah, it definitely took a huge toll. I would say I was, you know, very depressed and very, just like you said, a lot of shame. There was a lot of just, I would almost call it like almost an obsessive compulsion when it came to, you know, constantly just thinking about what I've eaten, what I, you know, constantly thinking about exercise, constantly thinking about calories. And so there was obsession there. There was a lot of just like social anxiety. I didn't like to be around people because I was always worried that people were judging me or, you know, that nobody wanted to be my friend. And so there was a lot of, just feeling really bad about myself and just not really being able to see myself in a good light at all, you know, not being able to take compliments, not being able to enjoy myself. It felt wrong to, I don't know, like have a slice of pizza at a party. It felt wrong to get ice cream with friends. It was like, I felt like I missed out on a lot of the joy of childhood or teen years because I was like, well, you know, my friends, my siblings, they can do all this fun stuff. But for me, it's embarrassing. Like it was a lot of embarrassment, I would say.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, it's just difficult. I was somebody who also like in middle school, like that's when I started to, you know, have some weight gain, which I think is pretty typical, you know, as you're going through puberty and your hormones are all over the place. But it was also the time, you know, where I was deeply aware of my body and messages around my body, not only from purity culture, but diet culture that was in the 90s, you know, so it's like, you know, no, don't eat any fat, you know, restrictive calories, way down workshop, like all of those things that was like so popular. And I feel like it just steals your innocence almost because like, how do you even conceptualize that as a middle schooler or a high school, like what's happening in my body and how that's connected to spiritual things and how my family is viewing it. And they say that wanting to help me because they love me and they, want the best for me, but it just feels so shitty all the time. And so, yeah, I thank you for sharing that. I really resonate with that. And I wonder too, I know we probably didn't have a lot of like a concept of bodily autonomy back then, because of all the things. But when you think back on those years and even like leading up to your gastric bypass surgery, what is the impact that you feel in terms of bodily autonomy? How was that impacted?
Yeah, I think it really set me up to believe my body's not my own, that it was
Yeah.
always being somehow policed by somebody
Mm-hmm.
else, whether it was my parents or, a personal trainer. I had like, a personal trainer for a while at the gym, or I was being, or doctors, like different people had opinions about my body. And so
Yeah.
it felt like such a lack of privacy about my own body. It felt
Mm-hmm.
like I couldn't really, yeah, like it just kind of dismantled the whole idea of bodily autonomy. And then on top of that, I'm learning things about, sex and purity culture and all of that. And I had always planned on, saving myself till
Mm-hmm.
marriage. There was still that idea of like, even before I can even do that, I have to lose weight first, because the
Yeah.
idea an overweight person having sex is like, unheard of. It was a
Yeah.
lot of those messages. So
Mm-hmm.
I felt like I could take what I learned about purity culture and waiting till marriage and all of that. I was like, I have to save that for when I am actually desirable. And so it
Yeah.
felt like I couldn't even, and then at that point my body would belong to my husband, or,
Mm-hmm.
so it felt like it was never going to be my turn to have control over myself.
Yeah.
I'm curious too. So there was the anecdote earlier about like having to find the doctor in Las Vegas and
Mm.
how traditionally with what insurance would reimburse for, like you didn't even meet the criteria. So all of that to
Mm.
say, I'm just curious, how did medical professionals treat you as a teen that was overweight at the time? Like, I mean, how did they show up in all of this?
Yeah, I mean, it was kind of like, it was interesting because there were some doctors that would say things like, "Oh, well, you're young," and they weren't like too concerned about it because they're like, things fluctuate when you're young, and that's kind of a big reason why my primary care doctor didn't want me to get the gastric bypass, because he's like, "You're so young, there's so much you could do, and this isn't necessarily like, we don't have to go to this extreme." But then there were also, I don't know, I feel like there were also doctors that were just as bad as like my parents or something. They have a lot of these myths that they think about, why people are overweight. And I think a lot of doctors don't have a lot of, education
Yeah.
around what causes weight gain. And one of the things I discovered, in my teen years too, is that I have polycystic ovarian disorder, which can
Yeah.
cause weight gain in girls.
Absolutely.
But then like that never really got treated, because at that time doctors didn't really know what to do
Right.
about it. And so I always wonder, like, maybe if we had focused in on that and treated the PCOS, maybe
Mm-hmm.
that would have helped. Because I've heard stories from other women who've had that experience, and
Yeah.
it's like, yeah, you focus on treating that and these other issues go away. So there's a lot of myths going around in the medical field. And yeah, I don't know, I just never really felt like I had much of an advocate. I will say, I mean, in spite of everything, I felt like my gastric bypass surgeon was pretty open and accepting of me, and was very much like, yeah, I don't believe that people that are overweight are lazy or gluttons or whatever. He's like,
Mm-hmm.
there's a lot of factors that go into it. And so
Yeah.
I think he really believed in what he did. Whether or not that's the best medical choice for me or anyone else, I don't
Mm-hmm.
know. But I mean, I don't go around like evangelizing gastric bypass
Yeah.
whatsoever. But
Yeah.
yeah, like I don't know. I think that's part of the reason why I felt comfortable doing it, is because I felt like I did have a bit of an advocate there. And then the other thing I was going to say, this doesn't necessarily tie in with medical, but there was a time where I was seeing a counselor for a while, just
Mm-hmm.
for my depression and stuff. And I told her about, my parents being obsessive about my weight. And there was a session she did with me and my parents. And it was amazing, because like, I mean, we never went back because my parents were pissed, but she really like chewed my parents out for, for just like causing, for saying all the things that they had said. And I just remember she like tore my dad apart because he's like, this is the same thing as if she was a smoker or she did drugs. Like, we'd be trying to get her to be better. And she was like,
Wow.
no, it's not the same fucking thing, you idiot. She's
Yeah.
like, someone who smokes can just stop smoking, but someone can't just stop eating. Like,
Right.
she just like, but I remember that was like the one time that I felt like somebody really like stood up for me and was like, what are you doing? You're causing more harm psychologically for her right now than this harm that you think her weight is going to cause her. And so I don't know, I guess to answer your question, I had a mix of people that I felt like advocated for me a little bit more, but I think overall, just as a culture and everything, there's still a lot of fat phobia.
Yeah.
Like, in general, that seems to be more resounding. So,
yeah. When you said this a little bit earlier, just that people's attitudes kind of changed towards you, or the way that they talked about you or to you changed after you had experienced this significant weight loss. Were your parents included in that, or like how did that shift in your family? Like, what did that look like in terms of a shifting relationship?
yeah, I would say it. I mean, well, for a while, I thought it like fixed my relationship with my dad because he and I just, and I was like, oh, cool, we can actually talk about literally anything else now. It's besides just my weight, because that seemed to be the only thing he ever wanted to talk about. So yeah, I would say that it, for a while, like, helped my relationship with my dad. But again, I think that he is someone who, he likes to focus on lecturing and telling people what to do. So he found something else to try to tell me how to live my life. He found other ways, but yeah, I would say it definitely, it gave them something else to talk about. And I was actually okay with that. I was to a point where I was like, I would rather my dad be like lecturing me about boys the way that he does my sisters, like instead of just my weight. I would take literally anything else at this point. So yeah, it worked maybe for a little while, but yeah.
Yeah. Well, yeah. And it's like you find out like it was never about the weight anyways, right? It's about things like control and, appearance and performing and perfection. And like, yeah, weight was the way it was masked for you, but it still was all about control, and him being able to have his voice or that sort of thing. So yeah, I think that's really, really interesting. You also said earlier, too, about just the way that the messages about your body were so interlocked with purity culture, desirability, worthiness, things like that. When I lose weight, then I'll be attractive. I'll find a husband, but I don't even have to worry about finding a husband until I lose this weight or whatnot. How did some of those beliefs really impact your relationship with things like food or movement, your own seeing yourself as a sexual being, especially in those adolescent and early adulthood years?
Yeah, I mean, I think it like fully wrecked my relationship with food to the point where I'm still not over it, as Andrew knows, who I live with. But yeah, like, I mean, I never learned how to like cook because like for me, like, food was something that I wasn't like allowed to have, or like, it was something that was so controlled in my house that I either felt like I had to like hide when I was eating, or I was so worried about everything that I ate that it was going to cause me to gain weight, or it was going to undo all my progress. So yeah, I mean, it definitely wrecked my relationship with food. And then when you get gastric bypass surgery, it's so hard to eat. It's like, sometimes it's like playing Russian roulette, like what's going to make me sick this time? What's going to make me nauseous this time? And so I still struggle with a lot of that, of like a fear of food. And just like not really understanding it and not feeling like I could like food. It felt like I could not ever be someone who's like a chef or someone who enjoys food, because it was like embarrassing to like food as a bigger person. So that's what I continue to struggle with. And it feels embarrassing too, to be like, I'm in my 30s now and I suck at cooking because I was just not really allowed to explore that part. And then movement, like I did so many things like growing up that my parents were constantly like putting me into sports or signing me up for gym memberships or putting me in with a personal trainer and stuff. So like I hate going to the gym. I feel very embarrassed at the gym still. So I'm like, if I exercise, I like to do it privately. I don't like anyone to look at me. I don't like, I'll do yoga on my own. but I don't like classes. I don't like, being looked at, because it reminds me of being a young person in the gym and just feeling judged. So yeah, it sort of put a damper on movement for me, because it just made me feel like no matter how hard I work out, how hard I try, it's not going to change anything. And yeah, and then I can't remember what the other, let's see.
Sexuality. Yeah, just like
Oh.
as you connected to sexuality.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it also became something that was like off limits for me to even like think about, because yeah, it was like, yeah, that's not really something that's ever going to happen for me. So I have to, like kind of, it was sort of a maybe someday, but I really repressed my sexuality, because I was like, well, on one hand, it's because I was a Christian and I thought that's what I was supposed to do. But on the other hand, like, it's not like I was never in a situation where I felt tempted or anything like that. I had one boyfriend in high school for like 3 months, but it was not anything more than kissing. And even then, that just felt really like very weird. I felt, there was something about like, I don't feel like I deserve to have a boyfriend, especially in high school dating, being like an overweight girl with a boyfriend who was average size. That really messed with my head, because I felt like, oh, this is like not supposed to be happening. And so, yeah, I felt like sexuality for me was like, nope, this is probably never going to happen. There was a time when I thought, I'm just going to be a missionary and just be single the rest of my life. And maybe I'll adopt some kids, but I'm never going to be able to have sex. Like, there was a time when I actually, believed that. So sexuality for me came way later. It wasn't until I was in college and lost weight and was actually getting attention from guys for the first time that I ever had to put myself in a situation where it's like, oh, I'm finally in that situation where I'm, with someone and it's getting hot and heavy and I have to make a decision. Like everyone else I knew, my sisters, my girlfriends, they had been in those situations since high school. They had to make, and I'm like in my early 20s and mid 20s being like, oh my gosh, like this has never happened. I've never spent the night with a guy. I've never had to, do anything like this. So it like pushed my sexuality forward like so much, because I didn't get to have all those teen experiences that a lot of people had. It all happened in my 20s and beyond.
Yeah. I get that.
Yeah. So on that note about like just experiences with sexuality and everything, what kinds of shame or pressure did you carry, not just about being sexual, but about even being seen in your body?
Yeah, I think I carried a lot of shame and embarrassment in, just physically, like being naked or like even just having desire felt like a little bit, like that I shouldn't have desire, because anything I've desired up to this point is considered wrong. And so, yeah, I don't know if that really answers the question, but just it made me like press everything. And I basically told myself like, no, I don't deserve this, or this isn't for me. So yeah, just a whole lot of guilt and shame, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah, I resonate very much with your story and just like the themes that you have. I remember I used to do 40-day fasts for Lent. I mean, super unhealthy, right? Like I would do liquids only fast, and I did it every year for I think 12 years, which I'm just like, I know that my body has been impacted long term. But I would obviously lose a significant amount of weight when you're not eating for 40 days. And I remember one time being with my mentor, and I was I was probably the thinnest I had ever been. And that wasn't why I was fasting, but it was like an added perk or whatever. And I remember feeling this level of confidence in my body. And I think it wasn't just because I was the size I was, but there was some other like mental health, like positive things going on of like, oh, this is my body, like that sort of thing. But I remember just feeling that sense of confidence, and then that translating to relationships, like even just friendships that I had with men, and noticing that women in particular were a lot more skeptical of me or quick to like call me out or things like that. And I was telling my mentor, like, I'm so afraid of this skinny body that I'm in, because I think now it is going, like my body is going to cause men to sin. and lust and stumble, and like I am going to be manipulative and flirty, and I don't want that to happen. And she was just like, oh my gosh, it's so great that you know that, and like your body has this power to do. And I'm just like, oh my gosh, like it's so messed up. Like, but like that was seen as a holy thing to know that because my body was smaller, I now had to deal with this, like this potential sin that I could commit of making men stumble and lust over me. It was just so bizarre.
Yeah. I had the same exact thing happen in college too. So yeah, it's so great.
Yeah. Yeah. So anyways, yeah. So curious to know then, I mean, and go with this wherever you want, if there's other things you want to share, but looking at starting to heal from some of this, like, did you have some specific moments or turning points in your own path towards healing from things like purity culture, diet culture, some of this body image stuff, family stuff? Because this is a lot to hold.
Yeah. I mean, as I went through college, I mean, ironically enough, it was a Christian college, but that's where I started to deconstruct my faith and dismantle a lot of what I've been taught and stuff. So I would say it's kind of cliche, but like as I was losing weight, I was also losing my faith because I started to realize like all of this is kind of bullshit. Like this evangelical Americanized Christianity that I grew up in is actually nothing like the early Christianity in the Bible. Everything I was learning in my theology classes, I was like, oh, American culture has really just taken Christianity and made it their own thing. So I started deconstructing my faith. I started, just realizing that a lot of what I've been taught was just to make myself smaller, whether that was physically or, to make myself be quieter and to not be a feminist and to not. So my politics started to change in college. I grew up in a very conservative household, but then I realized like, oh, it only benefits men when women say nothing and when women back down and when they don't have a voice. So I was dismantling all of these things. Yeah, I mean, my relationship with my family was really on the rocks, and it's kind of gone back and forth through the years. But yeah, I mean, there was a time where I was like, no contact with my dad because I was so, I was really trying to figure all this out. And I had so much resentment for him for how he dealt with me growing up, and that our whole relationship was about him trying to change me. And I had to really reckon with that. And so, I was trying to reclaim a lot of the stuff that I'd missed out on in my teen years. So by the time that I graduated college, I didn't consider myself a Christian. I wouldn't say I like experimented very much, but it was that same kind of thing where I was like, maybe alcohol isn't this horrible thing that everyone says it is. Maybe I can have some alcohol. Maybe I can, like put myself out there more. Maybe I can wear things that are considered, too edgy or whatever. I got tattoos. That's when I started getting tattoos, is like, because that was considered another, like, don't put tattoos on your body because your body's a temple. So I was finally starting to do things that were like, this is my body and I will do what I want. And so, I would say as I dismantled my faith, that's when I started kind of reclaiming who I am and reclaiming my body as well.
I love that.
Yeah, no, that's so interesting. Just the parallel process that was happening there with like deconstructing your faith, but also while your body was changing. But then, the relationship to faith and family and all of that was changing as well. I'm curious, what has it been like, just the experience of like anger or grief around just what was done in the name of, I don't know, protection or purity or all of the things that happened? Like, how has that been, just that process?
Yeah, there was definitely a time where there was a lot of anger and grief. I would say that happened a lot. Probably about 5 years ago is when I really started having health issues related to the gastric bypass, and that brought up a lot of anger and grief there. I had really terrible anemia and had to get iron infusions, and so that's something I'll have to do for the rest of my life, because when you have gastric bypass, you can't absorb iron, and I got very low in iron, and so that's just something I have to keep up with. And that just really, I don't know, that made me again like get really angry at my dad, because his whole theory behind this was, we want you to lose weight for your health. And I have had infinitely more health things pop up since losing weight. And so, there was a lot of bitterness there, a lot of like, it was never about the health. And so I have a lot of grief around just, feeling like it was like I was lied to or like, I don't know, gaslit into thinking that like that my health was ever the issue. I think I have a lot of resentment around just the church in general and how they kind of just turned a blind eye to how I was being treated. I think everyone in my church knew that my parents were pretty awful to me, but it's like the abuse that comes with fat shaming isn't really something that people talk about or isn't something that people feel like they can say anything about. And so I feel a lot of resentment that like pastors, youth pastors, more people didn't kind of step up and call my parents out, that the only adult in my life that ever did was that one therapist. And like I had so many like family friends, aunts and uncles, people who knew that my parents were like so obsessed with my weight and were doing things that in my opinion now, because I am a early childhood educator and I'm educated on child abuse and different things like that, where it's like, yeah, there's a lot of like really sketchy shit that they were doing is that would like border on abuse, hiding food, locking cabinets, locking refrigerators, things like that. And then I think I also just have a lot of, I don't know if this is anger or resentment, but I am noticing now, and I don't hate it, but it's also like, wow, I'm noticing now there's so much more body positivity in the world. And I'm kind of like, I just wish that it existed more when I was growing up. Or like, God, even clothing. I had such a hard time finding clothes that were my size, like growing up, and like could not buy anything from the juniors section. I had to get stuff that was like, that my mom wore. Like, and now it's like, it seems like there's such a diversity of size for all kinds of styles. And I'm like, I'm mad that I missed out on a lot of that as a kid. Like I was never the teenage girl that liked to go shopping. Like, oh my God, no. Like I've never, and I missed out on those years. I would go to the mall with my friends, but there's no freaking way I would be trying on clothes with my friends. Like it just, we didn't wear the same sizes. It was just embarrassing. So I have a lot of like, I don't know, like I'm glad now that culture is changing and that people are more accepting, but I'm also like I just wish that, because it's like it's been there all along. People could have been doing this all along, or like, I get like salty when I see that Abercrombie makes stuff in XXL now, and I was like, what are you like? I never have worn Abercrombie when I was a kid. So, I don't know. That's there's a lot there that I'm still working through. I'll probably always be working through.
Yeah. No, I think all of that makes so much sense. And it's like, even when we go through these journeys of healing, there is like relief, right? Of like all the things that we're learning and growing. And then there is the grief is like right behind it. Cause it's like, I feel great now, but like, what if I didn't have to go through all of that? So yeah, I absolutely understand that. I'm curious, what do you wish that more people would understand about kind of that overlap of fat phobia, purity culture, and even spiritual abuse?
Yeah, I guess I wish in general people just knew how much it was connected. Like I don't think people realize that it's that intertwined. And I'm guessing it probably disproportionately affects women too. And I think that, I wish more people understood that it's not benign to push this like health message. I understand there's, people that make it their whole life, their whole personality to be like a health influencer or, wellness or whatever. But like that doesn't come without a lot of consequences, especially to young, impressionable people. And I feel like it is kind of a pipeline, a slippery slope to getting young people to internalize all of these messages. Because for me, it was like, oh, you're overweight and simply being overweight is a sin. And if you're sinning, you're not in good standing with God. And if you're not in good standing with God, then you're not a good Christian. And so it just makes you, perpetuate that, hate yourself. So I don't know. I get very defensive about, even if I see something about diet culture or weight loss culture online, I'm like, I don't think it's harmless. And especially when it's pushed in a Christian agenda. So I don't know. I mean, if it were up to me, like kids would not know anything about diet, ever until they're, well into their like adulthood or something. But because I don't know, just you internalize it so early and it becomes same with Christianity, it becomes a bad, good thing. Like when even the way that people talk, when they say they have like a snack or something and they're like, oh, I'm being bad today. I had a cookie. And it's like they're moralizing food, and kids take that in. Kids start categorizing things. I have 2 little nephews and I've noticed they've already started saying things like, oh, is this healthy food or is this not healthy food? And so, and that maybe that is benign, but it's just something that I'm way more sensitive to because I was given such extreme messaging around it. So,
yeah. Well, so much of it too felt like the messaging that you were given was just so disingenuous. It's like they say it's about health.
Right.
But then the only people who are getting lectured about health are folks who are overweight.
Mm-hmm.
So is it actually about health or is it about appearance? And so it's just like that. It's that incongruence there where it's like you say this is what it's about, but it's clearly not actually about that. Because like you said, you didn't actually have health issues. You were functionally doing everything that any other teenager was doing and you enjoyed your life. So it's like, what's the problem?
Right.
It wasn't even about health. It was about appearance.
Yeah. I mean, my mental health was not good, but of course nobody can see that.
So I'm curious if you could say something to someone listening to the podcast right now, who's still struggling with just, I don't know, that messaging of shame and everything. I'm just curious, what would you say to them?
I guess just that none of this matters. Like, I mean, I guess I'm coming at it I'm like an atheist now. So I have a little bit of removal from that whole spiritual side of it. So, I mean, I'm saying this from like, it doesn't matter because there is no God and he doesn't care. And even if there was, he wouldn't care if you're fat. And like, I don't know. I think I would just say like, there's so many more important things in the world than what your weight is and what you look like and stuff. And I wish that I had focused more on that stuff growing up. I wish I had, like learned a new skill or read more books or done literally anything else than pay attention to that. Cause it's like, it's so not worth it. And it seems to be the thing that everyone's obsessed with. But like, I don't know. I can guarantee that it's not, at the end of the day, it's not worth it,
Yeah. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. We've used the word like autonomy, in this conversation. Another word that comes up a lot in our podcast conversations is liberation, which seems like such a forward path, coming out of purity culture, diet culture. For you, like, how would you define that? Or what does autonomy and liberation look for you? Not even necessarily spiritually, but you could go there if you wanted, but like today in your body.
Yeah, I think it's a lot about listening to my body, which I know that's kind of a buzzword or a cliche, but like that is a good way of putting it because I think I've had to learn to be like, yeah, if I'm hungry, I can eat. If I am feeling tired, it's okay to sleep and it doesn't make me a bad person to rest, and just sort of telling myself that my body knows what it's doing and it's trying to protect me and my body is for me. That's another like mantra that I've told myself is that, like growing up, you're told that your body or the flesh is evil. That's the messaging that comes up. But I think that I've had to reclaim, no, my body is good. And I feel happy when when my body does what it's supposed to do. I feel good when I can do a difficult exercise or when my body heals itself or whatever. I've started to, I guess just give my body more credit for what it can do instead of just focusing on the flaws and the different things. Cause it's so easy to focus on like what's wrong with your body or to point out all these things. But I've had to sort of, I don't know. Yeah, just give myself more credit for it. I think doing things like yoga has helped and just sort of being aware of my body and its in space and time. And that's been helpful because yoga does not make you, unless you're doing like power yoga, but it's not something where you're just trying to like get a really, really hard workout and sweat. It's where you're actually trying to make your body like work for you. And, so I don't know, I like viewing my body in a way that is like, yeah, this is like, I'm good. My body's good. It's not evil. It's not trying to tempt anybody. It's just, so yeah, that's kind of what I try to do. But yeah. Oh, and with sexuality too, like telling yourself that like it's okay to be turned on. It's okay to explore this. It's okay to, I wasn't like, I was never allowed to talk about like masturbation or anything growing up. And because that was always like a no. I didn't buy my first sex toy until I was 30. And so giving myself permission, yeah. So yeah, like giving myself permission to lean into desire and not see desire as something that is weakness, because that's what I always associated it with. And it was like, oh, if I'm hungry, that's a weakness. And so it's the same thing. It's like, it all kind of ties together in that way. It's like give in to your desires a little bit more. That's what I've been trying to do.
Yeah, I love that.
I'm curious, what gives you hope about this conversation? I don't mean literally this conversation, but the overarching conversation, how things are shifting culturally. Like, what gives you hope about all of this? And particularly for young folks who are still growing up in these religious spaces.
I think that with the advent of the internet and social media and all of that, more people are telling their stories and it's getting out there more, and people don't feel so isolated. So it does give me hope that somebody who's feeling lost can actually feel that connection, and they come across a podcast or a TikTok or something where somebody is sharing their story and then they feel less alone. So, I mean, for all of the shit that the internet can be, and because it can be really toxic, I will say like it has brought out so many points of view. And I never had that growing up. It was like, I mean, we had like MySpace and stuff. I guess that was like the closest we had. But as far as like TikToks and YouTube and all the content that we have now, I mean, I wish I had come across a creator who was like, hey, here's how I style plus size clothing. Here's some ideas for recipes. Here's something like, there's just so much there that it gives me hope that, I mean, there still needs to be guidance and discernment when it comes to what you're consuming online and what young people are consuming online. But I do feel hopeful that there's just a bigger amount of diversity out there. And I like how, sometimes not as much as I would like, but in the media, we're seeing people with different body types. We're seeing, like singers and creators and actors who have different size bodies. And it's not, we aren't just pushed with that one, body type that we're all supposed to look like how it was in the 90s and 2000s, where it's like, oh, everyone needs to look like Britney Spears or everybody, so yeah, I feel hopeful that with more connection and more content out there, that these young people can at least like think critically about things and be like, here's another perspective, or, so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's so important. And even as you were talking, it struck me that, so much of the way that purity culture or diet culture was able to maintain control is through defining like what is good or perfect in terms of your behavior, your body, things like that. And even by challenging that message culturally, so, whether that's through social media or just call it body positivity or just diversity of bodies really having a greater acceptance, like in a weird way, it also decreases the ability to control so much. Like I wonder, part of me wonders like what are places like churches going to start to do as the culture moves towards a greater acceptance of people's bodies, regardless of size, ability, skin color, like whatever. It's like that they lose control. Like, what is the way that they're going to try to grab after it? Are they going to dig their heels in and be like, no, like the skinny white woman is still this like prototypical ideal that we're going for? I mean, that's maybe different conversations for different days, but I think it is interesting to kind of step back and look and to see, like, on the one hand, this is so incredible that the conversation is shifting, but that is taking control out of the hands of the people that are wanting to stay in power. And I can't imagine that it's going to go unchallenged.
Yeah, no, definitely. I I don't know. I personally don't have huge high hopes for the evangelical church, but a lot of that is like up in my own bitterness for it. But yeah, I mean, there's going to have to be, some kind of reckoning with that, because it's like if they can't keep up with the way that things are changing, like that's why people are leaving the church, So if they do leave their heels in, like, that's gonna push a lot of people out, I think.
Yeah, I think so too.
I know I asked a few minutes ago what you would say to other folks still in these spaces, but I'm curious, if you could go back and say one thing to your younger self? So, the girl whose body was scrutinized, controlled, misunderstood. Yeah, what would you want her to hear? What would you want her to know?
Mm-hmm. One day you're going to have a really hot boyfriend who thinks your body's amazing. No.
Great answer. Yeah.
Well, no, I don't know. I think I would just tell myself like well, I don't know, probably like it is going to get better, but also like it's okay to challenge these ideas. It's okay to push back. I think I wish I would have had more courage to like, try to like challenge a lot of it. And I think I would have told myself like, this is not all there is. Like there's a whole world out there of people that are very different from you, very, that there's going to be more information coming your way. There's going to be more experiences coming your way. And I know that everything feels like it's such a big deal right now and you're in this vacuum, but like there's so much more life to be had. And there's so many more important things than what you weigh or what you're eating. And, so yeah, that's kind of what I wish anyone, an adult or anyone would have said to me at that time.
Yeah. That's awesome. That's one of my favorite questions. We've been asking it at the end of each episode that we've been doing, just because most of the people that we're talking to, even if whether you're a professional or whatever, we all have this experience inside of these cultures. And I think it really is so encouraging and heartening to hear like what people would have told their younger selves, because it seems so basic now, right? But like, yeah, you should tell this to a kid or to an adolescent, but it's like just how simple it would have been to be able to say something like that to any of us, and the profound impact that it could have had to really kind of change the course of your life, And so I think those are really beautiful things to hear, and I'm really appreciative for you sharing that, but also your entire story. It's been such a wonderful episode of being able to kind of see these intersections of purity culture and diet culture. And I'm just really, really grateful for your vulnerability and authenticity in sharing with us today.
Thank you. Thank you guys both for, let me tell my story.
Yeah. So if people want to follow you, get in touch with you, tell us a little bit about where people can find you online.
Yeah, Instagram is good. Ashley Dunston writer, all separated by underscores. But yeah, I'm a writer. I have a blog where I have a Substack, and then I have a blog where I have creative writing and nonfiction writing. And so, yeah, all of that is usually discoverable on my Instagram. And yeah, that's kind of a good place to start. So
I love it. Awesome. Well, we'll make sure that we include all of that in the show notes so people can get in touch with you or just follow along on your writing journey or wherever else you decide to go. But yeah, thank you again for being here today. It was such a wonderful conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you once again to Ashley for joining us for such an important conversation. I'm very appreciative that she joined us today. And I just want to encourage everybody, if you would like to get a hold of Ashley, follow her on social media or on her Substack. All of that information is in the show notes. So make sure to give her a follow. And just once again, thank you to Ashley for being here. And with that, I think all God's people said, amen.
Amen.